Thank you for that, David. Welcome. Good Sunday morning to you. Welcome you to Presbyterian Church of the Covenant, Greensboro, North Carolina. You can notice we have our slightly smaller summer attendance folks here. We're glad to have you, though. We're very happy to have you with you. Welcome to the folks who are online. You can find out more about us if you're online at the web address, thethinkingchurch.org. You can learn about us, and also if you're able to make a donation to help keep us online, we'd certainly appreciate that. It's a pretty simple setup we have. It costs us some money, and your pitching in certainly helps. We're glad to have everybody here. Michael Craig is back with us. For those who don't remember, you can go to davidmichaelcray.com, find out Borg and newer music stuff. He's got stuff with him here as well. We're going to get to enjoy his music throughout this time together. We're just glad to have him. I'm going to, last week I told you that I was stopping the kind of a little thing where we were taking a gospel text, and then we were kind of going, you've heard it said, but maybe this is another way of understanding it. It's more true to the biblical text. And I said, that's going to be it. And it is sort of it. But I had been asked to take a look at the book and story of Job. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at Job, and it is sort of the same thing, frankly, except it's not just about the Gospels. We're going to talk a little bit, very briefly, about the traditional understanding, and then start asking questions of the text that will maybe help us see a different perspective in it. So just to sort of get us familiar with it again, I'm going to read a couple of passages with a little bit of commentary in between for setup. So for those who are trying to follow along, we'll be doing chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. Then we're going to jump to chapter 13, verses 1 through 5. Then we'll jump to 42, 7 through 8. And it's all from the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. So, like I said, our reading comes from 3 moments in the book of Job. And we begin when Job's friends are arriving after they hear of all of the suffering that Job has had to go through. Hear now these words. Now, oh, that's right. And also, I'm going to stumble on some names here. Just pretend like I said them perfectly. Now, When Job's three friends heard of all these troubles that had come upon him, each of them set out from his home. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. Uh, they met together to go and console him and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they didn't recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept aloud, and they tore their robes and threw dust in the air on top of their heads. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. Okay, so then for 7 days, Job's friends sit silently beside him. Then they begin offering explanations. They insist, that Job's suffering must be the consequences of something that Job has done. And after listening to all of them, Job responds. He says this: Look, my eyes have seen all of this. My ears have heard and understood it. What you know, I also know. I am not inferior to you, but I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to argue my case with God. As for you, you're whitewashed with lies. All of you are worthless physicians. If you would only keep silent, that would be your wisdom. So the argument continues throughout most of the rest of the book. Job's friends are basically defending their understanding of God, while Job continues to challenge them and demand an answer from God. Now, near the end, God addresses his friends. So says, after the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now, therefore, take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering, and my servant Job shall pray for you. For I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly. For you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has done. May we add blessing and understanding to the reading of these words. And may we have another song from David. Thank you, David. I'm going to play Air on a G String by Johann Sebastian Bach. Thank you. Thank you. That was absolutely beautiful. Nobody ever wants to follow Bach. That's not cool. My message today is entitled, When the Explanations Become the Problem. So, if you grew up in church, there is a good chance that you were taught a very particular version of the story of Job. Job was this was probably what it was like. Job was a good, faithful man. God allowed terrible things to happen to him as a test. Job remained faithful, passed the test, and in the end, God gave him back everything he had lost and then some. And the lesson that we were supposed to get from this was pretty simple. When difficult things happen, keep believing. God may be testing you, but eventually it'll all work out. And I mean, that is one way to read Job. It's also a lousy thing to say to someone who feels like their life is falling apart. Because I have to say, if you're already carrying more pain than you really know what to do with, being told that God may be testing you is not especially comforting. It can make you feel like afraid, that feeling angry or exhausted means that, you are failing, as though every new difficulty were another question on some divine final exam that you never signed up to take. So let me say this clearly. I do not believe that God destroys lives to see who will remain loyal. I do not believe that God causes illness or grief or abuse or financial hardship or tragedy to measure the strength of our faith. That said, the opening of Job is troubling. Job loses his property, his livelihood, his children, and eventually he loses his own health. The story presents these losses as part of a dispute in the heavenly court. And in the text, the Satan, where we get the word Satan from, it actually means something closer to the accuser, not a particularly, devilish being that lives in the fiery pits of hell or anything. It's the accuser on the court and argues that Job is faithful only because his life has been pretty good. So take the good things away, the accuser says, and we'll see how faithful he really is. But you know what? While that does happen in the beginning of the book, most of the book isn't about this wager up in heaven. It's about what happens when people try to explain Job's suffering. And that's where Job's friends enter the story. When Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar hear what has happened, they go to Job. And when they see him, he's so sick they can barely recognize him. They weep, they tear their robes, they throw dust on their heads. Then they just plop down, sit on the ground next to him for 7 days and 7 nights. And no one really says a word because they can basically see how great his suffering really truly is. Now we're going to pause right there. We're going to a really brief congregational kind of interaction with each other. The question that I want you to answer, I'm only going to give you about a minute because it's only going to take about a minute. But what do Job's friends do right in those first 7 days? What does his friends do that's right, correct, a good thing in those first 7 days? So take about a minute, talk to someone close to you, and we'll come back and share some of those ideas. I just learned that this place right chases you. It was yeah, next time is what is just like you have it. So, I thought this is, yes, and I think it's sad that very positive. I mean, there's still there's like some ways, you know, yeah, get to that, but for me, it's kind of weird. So we're still, the reason they go long about the explain it, but that's just honest. I don't have one figured out. Let's wrap these conversations up, and we'll have somebody share with us what your thoughts were. Anybody want to share what you think y'all thought that the friends did right in the first 7 days? David.
They didn't say anything.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Others.
They were just
They
there.
were present.
They were-
They were present.
They stuck with them.
They showed up. They showed that they were hurting for him. But just kind of showed up, and like one of my other sermons and said, "Let me hold the umbrella in your storm," just like that. So honestly, they might have gone down. Those friends, those guys might have gone down as some of the best friends in the Bible if they had stopped there. But then they opened their mouths. See, their mistake is not that they don't care about Job. I mean, we all saw that. They obviously care enough to show up. Their mistake is deciding that Job's suffering needs an explanation, and that they are the ones that are qualified to provide said explanation. And honestly, their theology is pretty straightforward. Good people are rewarded, bad people are punished. It's neat, it's tidy. And unfortunately, Job's life is neither one of those things. Job is suffering, but he insists that he's done nothing to deserve it. But the problem is his friends just can't accept that because it would require them to question everything that they believed and knew about God and how the world works. So rather than question their own theology, they question Job, right? Maybe he has, committed a secret sin. Maybe he's failed to recognize wrongdoing that he's done. Maybe he needs to stop complaining and repent. And with every speech they give, the friends grow more certain and a whole lot less compassionate. They begin by sitting with Job in his pain, sure, yeah. Then they end up using their own theology against him. So Job finally tells them, and this is a quote, "You whitewash with lies. All of you are worthless positions. If only you would keep silent. That would be your wisdom. That's the biblical version of saying, you were helping until you started explaining. And let's be honest, we religious folks, we sure do like an explanation. Everything happens for a reason. God's trying to teach you something. God will never give you more than you can handle. We love an explanation. Now, I will say, people usually say those kinds of things because they honestly, I believe, are trying to help. But you know what? Good intentions do not somehow magically make bad theology helpful. Sometimes we explain because silence makes us a little bit uncomfortable. Sometimes we just want suffering to make some sense because then perhaps we can convince ourselves that it's not going to happen to us. Job's friends need him, well, they need him to be guilty because the alternative for them is pretty frightening. If Job deserves this, they can believe it in their own goodness, they'll be kept safe. If he is innocent, suffering may not obey the rules that they set up. Their explanations are a lot less about helping Job than about protecting themselves. And Job refuses to cooperate. He will not confess to something he did not do. He will not call injustice justice simply because religious people tell him that God has willed it. He will not pretend everything is fine just to make the people around him more comfortable. Job grieves. He rages. He questions. He demands that God listens. He says things that many of us were taught that faithful people do not say, particularly to God. But near the end of the book, God speaks to Job's friend, says, you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. I mean, think about that. The friends really have spent most of that book defending God. They have protected traditional theology. They have insisted that God is just, that the world is orderly, that Job must be responsible for his suffering. And Job, what he's done, Job's questioned God. He's accused God of treating him unjustly. He's demanded answers. And yet, God says the friends haven't spoken right, but Job has. So I'd have to say that apparently honest protest can be more faithful than religious certainty. Honest protest can be more faithful than religious certainty. Job does not teach us that faithful people never question God. It teaches us that faith can make room for questions and anger and confusion and grief and even accusation. Faith doesn't require us to lie about our pain or to call something good when it is destroying us or to defend a picture of God that makes God cruel. Some terrible things happen because people make terrible choices. Some happen because unjust systems hurt people. Some happen because bodies are vulnerable and life is fragile. And sometimes those things all just pile on top of each other and it happens. And sometimes we simply don't know why something happened. And I get, I don't know, may not feel satisfying, but I do think it is more faithful than assigning some cruelty to God just so we can have some kind of an answer. And in the end, Job never actually receives an answer for why this happened. His friends' explanations are rejected, but no new explanation ends up taking its place. So I have to wonder, could it be that why did this happen does not always have an answer capable of healing us? I think sometimes the more important question is, who will sit with me now that it has happened? And that is where Job's friends were at their best. Before the speeches and the accusations, before they needed Job's pain to fit their theology. Before that, they showed up. They sat in the dust and made sure that Job was not alone. And honestly, that's the work that we're called to do for one another. When someone is suffering, we do not need to explain God to them. We do not need to search their lives for a lesson or assure them that their pain is all part of some greater plan. You know, we can bring food. We can make a phone call. We can sit quietly. We can listen without correcting their grief. We can allow them to be angry without worrying that God needs us to step in and run the public relations department for them. And if they ask why this happened, sometimes the most honest answer will be, I really don't know. I'm here. But I'm here. Here's what I think. I think Job is not primarily a story about passing God's test. I think it's a warning about what happens when people become so committed to explaining suffering that they stop caring for the person who's suffering. Yet questions aren't the enemy of faith. Grief is not a failure of faith. Anger does not mean faith has disappeared. Sometimes refusing to accept a harmful answer is itself an act of faith. Ultimately, I believe that the surest lesson we can learn from Job is that when no explanation, no explanation can make things right, faithfulness may look like pulling up a chair, sitting down in the dust, making sure no one has to suffer alone. Amen. That-
I think one of the interesting things about that is that God knows everything. So he knows our character. He knew Job's character. He knew he would pass the test. So in a way, he was just revealing that, because the devil's questioning it, and it validates Job, to reveal that. So it's kind of, I don't always like that the tests I go through are just to reveal faith that I think I already have and that God already knows about. Because it feels like, well, if he already knows, why do I have to reveal it? but at the same time, I'm like, he's revealing it to a cloud of witnesses, not just to himself. But it feels, when you're going through it, that's not enough usually for an explanation. but I feel like this next song kind of fits with that, because I'm gonna play He's Got the Whole World in His Hands, which he does. He knows all of that stuff, and he's already prepared for it all. And we don't always know all of it, but he does. So anyway, this is He's Got the Whole World in His Hands.
Thank you for that. We come to a time, like I say, from time to time, this is a time of prayer, but it's also, you can think of it as meditation if you'd like. Think of it as a time just to close your eyes and take deep breaths and grab the words that you need. But let's close our eyes together. We like explanations. They help us believe that life makes sense, that suffering follows rules, that if we're good enough, faithful enough, careful enough, we can keep tragedy from finding us. And when those explanations fail, we sometimes protect them by blaming the person who's already hurting. May we recognize the harm we cause when we call suffering a punishment, a lesson, a plan, a test from God. May we stop trying to make another person's pain fit neatly inside our theology. When suffering finds us, may we know that anger is not faithlessness. Grief is not failure, and questions do not separate us from love. When suffering finds someone else, let us resist the urge to explain. Let us show up. Let us listen. Let us sit quietly without trying to repair what words cannot fix. And when we do not know why something has happened, may we simply be honest enough to say, I don't know. Then maybe pull up a chair, sit down in the dust, and stay. Not because we have the answers, but because no one should have to suffer alone. Amen. Receive this blessing. May you walk in harmony with each other and creation, recognizing that we are one. And may you know love and happiness throughout your life. And may your words and your actions share that love and happiness with all of those you meet.